Syria may have dominated the G8 meetings, but at its heart, it's an economic summit. As the British Prime Minister David Cameron said, the point of the G8 is to fire up our economies and drive growth around the world. With punishing unemployment weighing down the world economy and global markets in turmoil, the leaders had their work cut out for them. Neil Ferguson is Professor of History at Harvard University and also a Senior Research Fellow at Oxford University in England. In his new book, The Great Degeneration, he writes of the symptoms of decline that he sees plaguing the Western powers right now. Welcome to the program, Neil Ferguson.
Nice to be back.
Thank you very much indeed. And with this G8 summit that's just wrapped up, on the economic front, what do you say has been achieved there?
How about nothing?
Come on, Neil.
Well, they said they would try to nail down their corporate tax regime so that the big corporations can't pay zero tax. But I doubt very much that anything will come of this. And the big corporations will continue to dodge whatever taxes we come up with. And that's because we create ever more complex regulations and tax systems, which big corporations, of course, have the expertise to avoid, and it's the little guy who ends up paying. So nothing, I think, is the answer.
Is there no way around that? I mean, obviously, that's been something that the nations have been trying to deal with for a long time.
Yeah, and in the wake of the financial crisis, there's been a concerted effort, which David Cameron's been pushing hard for, to try to reduce the amount of tax evasion that goes on. But it's actually quite difficult for the G8 to do what needs to be done. After all, it's a much less dominant group of players than it used to be. The world has changed. You know, this is an institution that dates back to the 1970s, when it seemed obvious that Europe, North America plus Japan was the world economy. And that's not really quite the case anymore. Well, it was originally G6, then it became G7, and then they added the Russians in the 1990s. It's quite funny because they added the Russians, but they said you can't come to the finance ministers' meetings. So there's still a G7 for finance ministers.
Well, let me ask you about the Russians, because, look, the Russians, we've been talking about their obstructionism and their opposition to whatever the West wants to deal with in Syria. But let's talk about their economy and Vladimir Putin. For a long time, Vladimir Putin was able to do whatever he wanted, certainly at home, because there was a roaring Russian economy. He's in the G8 now, and the economy doesn't seem to be as roaring in Russia as it used to be.
Well, it's been doing pretty disappointingly. Of course, it's fundamentally a petrostate. And its economy is about as healthy as the price of natural gas and the price of oil are high, plus other commodities. As China has slowed down, as the world economy has slowed down, some of the heat has come out of commodity markets, and particularly, of course, natural gas. In many ways, the relationship between the Russian government and Gazprom has been so close as to make them inseparable. And Gazprom's a disaster zone. It was once
a huge natural gas company.
Well, once was huge. Now it looks a lot less huge because they completely failed to anticipate the shale gas revolution in North America. And so one of the most important parts of the Russian economy, the natural gas industry, looks much less impressive. And the leverage that it used to give Putin, particularly over the Europeans, is fast diminishing. So it's a changed Russia, and it's much less of a brick. Remember the bricks? I mean, the bricks are no longer quite as impressive. They're dropping bricks in many ways.
Let's just stick with Russia for a second, because some have said that, you know, it's not just the gas, it's not just the oil, it's also the politics there. And the fact that investment is being hurt and sort of, you know, brain drain of some sort because of the very restricted politics, you know, the moves that Putin is making, which is, in fact, potentially harming his economy.
Well, one of the arguments that I try to make in The Great Degeneration is that the rule of law is pretty important. Having elections is one thing, but it's really crucial that a democracy is rooted in the rule of law, and that you cannot say about Russia today. Indeed, in many ways, it's one of the most disturbing aspects of the post-communist Russian system that really you can't regard the courts with any confidence. And that, I think, is one reason that money is trying to get out of Russia and why really most foreign corporations have been very reluctant to get involved. There are some good news stories. You know, you can see some improvements happening in the financial sector. Medium-sized Russian cities are growing. It's not all bad. I was there recently. I went in January, and some things have improved. But fundamentally, something is rotten at the heart of the Kremlin, and I'm afraid there must be many people who wish they hadn't asked Russia to join the G7, and they could just have stayed at 7 and not had to deal with Mr. Putin. It would have made the conversation on Syria a whole lot easier this week.
It probably would have done. And what about China? You know, President Obama and President Xi Jinping had that summit in sunny lands, and it seemed to be going really well. And China, of course, is also talking about, you know, market economy, its economy. What about them? Should they be at the G8, 9, 10?
Well, yes, although...
I know they're at the 20.
You're right. So there's another G which we haven't mentioned, though, which is the G2, or Chimerica, as I like to call it, the two biggest economies in the world, China and the United States. Their meetings are becoming more and more important. And if anything could go wrong in the world, it would probably be in that relationship, which is why it's good that President Xi Jinping had this relatively informal meeting with President Obama. They didn't really have too hard and fast an agenda. It was a getting to know you better kind of meeting. And I think that was healthy and important, given just how central that relationship is to the global economy.
And of course, all of this happens in the ongoing discussion about national security. What in your book you talk about sort of the finances and the economy of the moment having a negative impact on national security?
Well, it was rather awkward, to put it mildly, that the United States was suddenly on the back foot on cybersecurity. The US has been pressing China, accusing China quite legitimately of hacking, and yet you suddenly had the scandal over NSA and PRISM, and the Chinese were able to say that Mr. Snowden was a heroic whistleblower exposing just the full extent of US electronic espionage. So I think this was pretty bad timing from an American point of view, and the Chinese media have made much of this crisis. I think when you look at the relations between these two powers, there's already what my friend Noah Feldman calls a cool war. It's not a cold war, but it's cool. Relations are becoming more hostile, and in some ways the war is already hot in cyberspace. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more clearly, that at least in this new theatre of battle, the realm of the social networks, the realm of the internet, there is now a major superpower conflict underway. Now, it's not as nasty or as noisy as a conflict involving battleships, much less nuclear weapons, but it's a conflict all the same.
And we'll keep watching it. Thank you so much, Neil Ferguson, for your insight.
My pleasure.